Hello everyone, I hope you guys are staying safe. I'm making this video for lesson 3, so 7B3. I know for the second lesson, Mr. Schwarber did like 3 videos. Hopefully you guys watched them on how to build the unit circle. So I'm going to show you guys how to use it now for our third lesson, okay? And I do want to apologize ahead of time because my pen, like the tip is broken, so I ordered a new one on Amazon, so we'll see when it gets here. So let's get started. So our third lesson, our objective, you guys are going to be able to find trigonometric values of unit circle angles, okay? So with Mr. Schwarber, you should have been able to build this unit circle, and hopefully it makes sense. I know it's kind of like, oh my gosh, this is too much. I'm lost. I'm confused. I don't know what to do. So I kind of want to just recap a little bit what you guys did. If you notice on the unit circle, I have it color coordinated. So all my red ones are the pi over 6 reference angles. So if you notice, the denominators are all like over 6, over 6, over 6, over 6. So the ones next to the x-axis, the ones that go like this, next to the x-axis, those are the pi over 6s. And then if you look at the, sorry, I thought I already had this open. If you look at the pink ones, let me switch color here. If you look at the pink ones, my pink ones are over 3s. Okay, so the pink ones are your pi over 3. So the pink ones are over here on the y-axis, okay? Next to the y-axis, those are your pi over 3 angles, and then the ones in the middle, the blue ones, are your pi over 4s. Sorry, apologize for my emails, but the middle ones, those are the blue ones, those are the pi over 4s, the 45-degree reference angles, okay? So the middle ones are your pi over 4s. Just remember that the ones next to the x's are your pi over 6's, the next to the y's, those are your pi over 3's, and the middle ones are your pi over 4's, okay? And then to build this whole like root 3 over 2, root 2 over 2, 1/2, like I know that's kind of confusing, so there's this thing called the left-hand trick. So the left-hand trick, I put this on your handout. So this left hand trick shows you how to use it. So if you take your left hand, which I'm gonna gently it's hard for me to do that way, so I'm gonna do it this way, okay? So this one, sorry, I apologize for my dog barking. So this one is your 0, then it goes to pi over 6 is your ring finger, the middle finger is your pi over 4, and then your index finger is your pi over 3, and then your thumb is your pi over 2 angle. So if you want to find, let's say like a pi over 6 angles, my pi over 6, I'm going to put down my ring finger, and then the ones at the top, those are your x, and the ones at the bottom are your y's. So my x is going to be you're going to count your fingers, so 1, 2, 3. I have a root 3 over 2, and then my y is going to be the bottom. So I have 1 finger, so that's root 1 over 2, which is just 1 over 2. Okay, so that gives me my root 3 over 2 and my 1/2. And you can double check your circle. Alright, so then if you want to do the pi over 4 angles, pi over 4, you bring down your middle finger. So your middle finger, then you have x is over here, so root 2 over 2, and y is down here, you got 2 fingers, so root 2 over 2. And then if you do the pi over 3 angles, pi over 3 is your index finger, so if you bring it down, you have your x is 1, have 1 finger, so root 1 over 2, which is 1/2. And then the bottom fingers are your, so I don't know what I said, but these are your x's, apologize, and these are your y's. So my y would be root 3 over 2. So I have 1/2 root 3 over 2. Okay, and you can use this for every quadrant. I know this says it only works for quadrant 1, but just your reference angle. So if you have a pi over 4 reference angle, that's your middle finger. If you have pi over 6s, those are your ring finger, and then the pi over 3s are your index fingers. Okay, and I forgot to say that this also works for the thumb and the pinky. So your pinky would be like your 0 angle. So if I bring down my 0 angle, then I have, it's so hard to just keep my pinky down. But okay, anyways, you got 4 fingers up here, so that's going to be a root 4 over 2, which is just 2. So you get 2 over 2, which gives you 1 for your x, and then you don't have any fingers below the pinky, so that's 0 over 2 gives you 0. So then the coordinate for the 0 is 1, 0. And then for your thumb, the thumb is the pi over 2. So your pi over 2, if you bring it down, I don't have anything to on this side of my thumb, so that's a 0 over 2, which gives you 0 for your x. And then I got 4 fingers, so root 4 over 2 gives you 2 over 2, which is just 1 for your y. So it also works for those, okay? So I'll kind of show you guys how to use that as we're doing our lesson. And then something else that you need to know is your coordinates, which I think Schwarberg already talked about this the other day on the videos. But something that I like to show for remembering the signs is all students take calculus. So I'm going to put here all students take calculus. So this tells you they're all positive. So we're going to write here all students take calculus. Okay, so then the A tells you that they're all positive. And then the S tells you that sine is positive. And then the T tells you tangent is positive. And then the C tells you that cosine is positive. And then everything else would be negative in that quadrant. So in quadrant 1, they're all positive. In quadrant 2, sine is positive, cosine is negative, tangent is negative. And then in quadrant 3, tangent is positive, which means sine and cosine would be negative. And then in quadrant 4, you can see cosine is the one that's positive, and then sine is negative, tangent is negative. Okay? Alright, so for prior knowledge, it says use the unit circle to find each value. So if we go back to your unit circle, you can go look for 7 pi over 6, but then this is asking for cosine. So really it's asking for, if you remember, it's cosine theta, sine theta. So x is cosine and then sine is y. So it's asking for what x value is at 7 pi over 6. So if you look at your unit circle for 7 pi over 6, let me go back to here. Unit circle, you look for 7 pi over 6, which is right here. 7 pi over 6, my x value is negative root 3 over 2. So then my answer is just negative root 3 over 2. Sorry, this thing is weird sometimes. Okay, so negative root 3 over 2. The other way you can, if you want to use your 5 fingers for your left hand trick, is the pi over 6. So remember, the pi over 6 is your ring finger, so if you bring that down, it's asking the x. So the top ones are your x. I got a root 3 over 2. And then 7 pi over 6, if you think about the coordinates, your 7 pi over 6, this is going to be pi, right? So pi would be 6 pi over 6. So 7 pi over 6 is going to be here in quadrant 3. Okay, so in quadrant 3, I have all students take calculus. So my T tells me tangent is positive, which means everything else is negative. So that's why this is a negative root 3 over 2. Okay, eventually you will have to memorize the whole unit circle. So knowing little tricks like that will help you versus having to look at your unit circle like every time. Alright, so then if we look at sine of 225, so my sine of 225, so that's my 180. So if you think about the unit circle, this is 180, this is 270, so 225 is right in the middle of both of them. So again, this is in quadrant 3, so quadrant 3 for 225, this is actually a pi over 4 reference angle. So if you look at the pi over 4, this is 4 pi over 4. So this one is actually 5 pi over 4. But regardless, it's still a pi over 4. So remember, pi over 4 is your middle finger. So if we bring it down, this is asking for sine, so it's your y. Y's are at the bottom. So this is going to be root 2 over 2. Okay? And it's in quadrant 3. So quadrant 3 tells you it's negative because tangent is the positive one. So then this is going to be negative root 2 over 2. Okay? And you can verify if you look at your unit circle. Sorry, I forgot to just leave it here. So 225. I have my y is negative root 2 over 2, okay? Because this is asking for sine, which is your y value, okay? All right, so now let's look at the quotient identity. So you have learned that in the unit circle, the cosine and sine of the angle that correspond to the x-coordinate and y-coordinate respectively, where, let me change this to, whoops. I was here, sorry, I was trying to switch the pen to a highlighter. So highlighter, sorry. So you have learned that the unit circle cosine and sine are the x and the y coordinates respectively, where the terminal side of the angles intersects the unit circle. And then using this and your knowledge of right triangle trig, we can derive what are known as the quotient identities. So quotient identities, you need to know that sine theta is y, and we can see that because, let me go back to my pen. Sorry, I changed color for highlighter. So my pen is here. My pen, oh my gosh. My angle is here. So this is the opposite side, this is the adjacent side, and this is your hypotenuse side. So for sine, I know that's opposite over hypotenuse. So I got y over 1, which just gives you back y. And then for cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So that's x over 1, which is just x. So you need to know, sorry, I keep switching on here. You need to know that cosine theta is x. And then we have tangent theta, so tangent is TOA. I have y over x because I got my opposite side over the adjacent side. So y over x, and if I substitute x, I know x is cosine, and then I can substitute my y is sine, so then tangent theta is sine over cosine theta, okay? So you guys need to memorize this one. I would box it, underline it, highlight it, whatever you gotta do. This tangent theta is sine over cosine, okay? That is what we know as the quotient identity. But I'm pretty sure you can't see the cosine very well over here, but this is what you guys need to remember. The quotient identity is tangent theta equals sine over cosine theta, okay? So let's look at some examples here. So it says use the unit circle and trigonometric identities to find each exact value. So to find tangent of pi over 6, I know that my trig identity is, let me go back to my pen. My trig identity here is tangent of pi over 6 is going to be sine of theta, so sine of the angle pi over 6 over cosine of the angle, which is pi over 6, okay? And I know that sine is my y, and then cosine is my x for the angle. So I'm looking for my tangent of pi over 6. So if you want to do your left hand trick, pi over 6, that's your ring finger. So bring down the ring finger. I have my y goes first, so y is the bottom. Or let's just look at the coordinate for pi over 6. So my coordinate, excuse me, for x, the top ones are your x. So this is, I have 3 fingers, so root 3 over 2. Root 3 over 2. And then my bottom finger is my y, so this is 1. So this is 1 over 2. It's root 1 over 2, which is just 1/2. Okay? So then I know that this is my x and this is my y. Apologize. This one is my y. So this tells me that this one is cosine and this one is sine. So by substitution, my sine of pi over 6 is 1/2 over cosine of pi over 6 is going to be root 3 over 2. And then in order to get the root 3 over, in order to divide fractions, then you guys need to remember that in order to divide by a fraction, you need to multiply by the reciprocal of the denominator. So this is 1/2 times the denominator. I'm going to flip it, okay, take the reciprocal, is 2/√3. And then by canceling, my 2's cancel, and then I get 1/√3. But then we need to rationalize because I can't have a radical in the denominator, so we're going to do times root. Oh my gosh, I hate this thing. So times √3/√3. That's going to give us √3/3. So tangent of pi/6 is going to be √3/3. Okay. And then you can verify again. If you don't want to use your left-hand trick, if it's too confusing, then go back to your unit circle. You're going to look for tangent of pi/6. So pi/6 is my red one. Notice I got √3/2 and 1/2. Those were the coordinates that I had over here. √3/2, 1/2. Okay. So then I got tangent of 135. Oh, and then I forgot to mention that is in quadrant 1. So quadrant 1, they're all positive, right? Okay, so then in tangent of 135, the way I like to remember is kind of just think about the unit circle. I'm trying to find a place to put this here somewhere. Okay, I'm gonna do it over here, but then I'm gonna erase it. Okay, so I have my quadrants. I have this is 180, so I know 135 is less, so it's gonna be on this one. It's gonna be in quadrant 2. So I know all students, so sine is positive, that means cosine and tangent are both going to be negative. So I know this answer is going to have to be negative, and then I got to figure out like where exactly, okay? A trick to remember, anytime you see like 5s at the end, that tells you they're the 45 reference angles. So the 45 is your middle finger because it's the pi/4s, okay? So remember I got like 0, pi/6, pi/3, sorry, pi/4, pi/3, and then pi/2. And if you think about the degree measures, this is 0, 30, 45, 60, and 90. Okay, so then the 45 one is the middle finger. So then I have my x is going to be √2/2. So my coordinate is √2/2. And then my y is √2/2. Okay. So then this is my x is cosine and my y is sine. So I know I'm going to do the cosine of 135 degrees over sine. Oh my god, sorry guys. My dog is barking and I did this wrong. This is sine of 135 degrees over cosine of 135 degrees. And I apologize, my pen is acting all funky. I really need a new one. Anyways, so sine of 135, I have √2/2 over, I know sine is positive, so that was the positive one, √2/2. And my cosine is actually negative because only sine is positive here. So this tells me this is going to be a negative √2/2. So I have something divided by itself just gives you 1, but one of them is negative. So this tells you it's -1. So your answer is -1 for this one. Okay. I think something else pops up, so let me erase this. So let me erase this here. This is actually -1 here. Alright, so then I got tangent of pi/2. So tangent of pi/2, again, you can use your hand or you can look at the unit circle, but pi/2 is your thumb. The thumb, my coordinates are going to be, I don't have anything over here, so this is a 0/2, which is just 0, comma, and then I got 4 fingers, so √4/2, square root of 4 is 2, so 2/2 gives you 1. And you can verify on your unit circle that at pi/2 you got 0, 1. Sorry. Alright, so then I got 0, 1 is my coordinate. And again, remember x is cosine and then sine is your y. And then for tangent, my trig identity is sine over cosine. So sine of pi over 2 over cosine pi over 2. So my sine of pi over 2 is 1. And then my cosine of pi over 2 is 0. But anything divided by 0 is undefined. You actually cannot divide by 0, so this is undefined. Okay, so your answer is, you won't say it's no solution, it's just undefined. Okay, so tangent of pi over 2 is undefined. Okay, I just realized I forgot my negative in this one. Go make sure you go put it on that one. Okay, I didn't realize I was already at 20 minutes, guys. Sorry. But from there, it's basically just practicing. So if we look at this next example, go ahead. Oh, I just showed you the answer, but go ahead and pause the video for the next few examples and then try it. So tangent pi over 4. Hopefully you tried it. You should get 1 because it's up against pi over 4. So pi over 4 gives you root 2 over 2, root 2 over 2, which is 1. And then tangent of 210. Go ahead and try this one and pause the video when you finish. Okay, hopefully you paused it. So here's the solution. So tangent, that's actually in quadrant 3. So in quadrant 3, your coordinates are root 3 over 2 and 1/2. And quadrant 3, tangent is the one that's positive. Everything else is negative. So you can see sine is negative, cosine is negative. Okay? All right. This one's just the basics. So cosine of 60. Cosine is your x. So your 60 is your index finger. So x is the top one. So this is a 1/2. And this is in quadrant 1, so they're all positive. So your answer is just 1/2. Sine of 5 pi over 4. If you think about the unit circle, pi is going to be 4 pi over 4. So 5 pi over 4 is 1 more. So that's going to be, and again, it's the 4 pi over 4. So that tells you that it's the middle one. So pi over 4 is your 45 degree. And then remember, it's all students take calculus. So tangent is positive, meaning that sine is going to be negative. So the y value is negative at 5 pi over 4. And it's a pi over 4, so bring down your index finger. The y is the bottom, so this is a root 2 over 2 is your answer. And it's negative root 2 over 2 because only tangent is positive here. Okay. Let me erase this. All right, then tangent of 180 degrees. 180, that's your pi. So if you think about this x-axis, your x is going this way. Left one, so this is -1, and then it's staying there, so it's 0. So -1, 0 is tangent of 180, so this is cosine. It's -1, sine is 0. So sine of 180 over cosine of 180. That's going to be 0 over -1, which is 0. The difference on this one is you're not dividing by 0, so this one, the answer is 0. Okay? All right, and I think that's pretty much it. So go ahead and practice sine of 120. That's your y value, and this is in quadrant 2, which is sine is positive, so your answer should be positive root 3 over 2. Okay? All right, and then cosine of pi, that's your 180, it's pi. Cosine, that's the x, is -1. And it's just practice again. 225, that's ends with 5, so that's a pi over 4. So pi over 4, it's going to be 225, that's in quadrant 3, so it's going to be positive. And then it's root 2 over 2 over root 2 over 2, so it's going to be 1. Okay? And then cosine 7 pi over 6, that's one more than 6 over 6, so that's going to be in quadrant 3. So cosine, all students take, cosine is going to be negative, so it's going to be negative, and then your pi over 6 is your ring finger. X's is up here, so it's negative root 3 over 2. Okay. Tangent of 3 pi over 2, that is your 270, 3 pi over 2, so that tangent is going to be undefined. Negative 1, 0. You can't divide by 0, so it's undefined. And then tangent of pi, that is going to be 0. The difference between those two is you can't divide by 0, and then you can divide by negative 1. 0 divided by anything is 0, versus anything divided by 0 is undefined. Okay? And then closure, explain when tangent value will be undefined. Basically, it's anytime you have the denominator is 0. So anywhere your cosine is 0 is going to be undefined. So your cosine is 0 at pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. So that's where it's undefined. Okay? All right. Hope you guys are doing safe. And I'll see you guys next time.